I'm excited to visit with you all today. And uh, Really, I've been looking forward to doing this presentation. And, you know, I, uh, I was telling Terrell earlier, I'm fairly new to extension and academia, at least since I was in school, which would have been a long time ago. But the last over 30 years, I've been working in the cattle industry, cow calf and feed yard area, really all over the U.S. And that's not to say that I'm not trying to say I know everything because I learn something new every day, but I do have some experience beyond the academic side, and I want to try to mix that together and share that with you. And I'd say, first of all, I want y'all to feel free to ask questions here as we go. I have some information prepared, obviously, but I want to answer the questions that you have, and so if the information I have is not addressing your questions, I want to answer your questions. That's why we're here. And so that's what's important to me. So please feel free to ask any question, and if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. So because there's plenty of things I don't know. The other thing I want to say is that we'll talk about a lot of principles here, and I've worked enough in different parts of the country to know that that the principles are principles work no matter where you're at. The difference is application. Application of principles are different in different parts of the country, and I've never run cattle in a part of the world that y'all do. And so I realize it's different, and how you apply some of these principles might be a little different. And I'd certainly, entertain discussion around that particular topic because I think you have a challenging environment to work with. So anyway, with that, I'll get started here. Let's see. Okay. So bottom line is I want to just talk a little bit about why cows either don't breed or don't breed back at all, or don't stay bred. And we'll discuss each one of these things. We'll discuss a little bit the disease processes and what some of the major disease issues are. There are certainly some poison plants in your part of the world. Done a little bit of research on that. That y'all deal with that are probably problematic at times. There's always nutrition, and that can be an issue as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And the question I pose there in the nutrition is, do your cow's requirements exceed available resources? And I think almost no matter where you're at in the country, depending on what stage of production your cow is in, that the answer to that is yes. At some point in time, I think that your cow's requirements are going to exceed the resources. So what do you do about that? And then talk a little bit about management and measurement of what you're managing. So we'll hit those topics as we go through. First thing we'll talk about is brucellosis, also known as bangs. And was that a question that jumped up?
No, sorry, it's just
Oh,
another
that's somebody else. Yeah. Okay. Brucellosis is something that has been on the radar really nationally for a long time, and there's been a lot of effort made to eradicate it. It can still be a problem in certain places. It usually results in abortion at kind of 5 to 7 months into pregnancy. At times you'll have a pregnancy that goes full term, and you'll have calves that are weak and unhealthy, and oftentimes won't live very long. It was real widespread up into the 1950s, and then there was a national eradication program put in place to vaccinate and try to remove it, which has been largely successful. It's highly contagious, though. When cattle get infected, it can also be a problem where there's a lot of wildlife. And I'd say the biggest issues that I know of that are kind of just active issues would be around areas like Yellowstone Park, because the bison, and anywhere you'd have a lot of wildlife population that mixes with your cattle population, you can have potential of brucellosis that's carried in bison and elk in particular that can transfer to cattle. In general, the states that y'all are doing business in, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah, are considered brucellosis free. but a lot of folks still vaccinate for it, and I think it's a good idea to do so. It can also be, depending on what state you're shipping animals to and from, there can be restrictions with moving mature females that are unvaccinated across state lines. Feeder cattle aren't a problem, but unvaccinated females, some states will not accept them. And so that can also be an issue. Typically, you're going to vaccinate a non-pregnant female really before she's 12 months old. And, certainly a best management practice is to vaccinate any of the heifers that you want to keep for replacements. So it's really not necessary to vaccinate feeder heifers that are going to be sold, but any heifers that you might want to keep for replacements is just a good management practice to go ahead and vaccinate those. Questions on brucellosis? Okay. All right, we'll talk a little bit more about a few others. So bovine viral diarrhea, which is also known as BVD, is also highly contagious, can cause a lot of different symptoms in cattle. Probably more often see it in young calves, but it can be, bloody diarrhea, high fever. You can see real serious respiratory symptoms, such as pneumonia. Oftentimes is fatal. Antibiotics are really ineffective because it's a virus. And the issue you have when it comes to females is that if a female is pregnant, when she contracts BVD, she may get a little bit sick, but oftentimes, two things can happen depending on what stage of pregnancy that she's infected. One, she can abort, or two, which in some ways you're better off if she does abort, or two, her calf can be born with what they call being persistently infected, or be a PI calf. And the difficult thing with these calves is oftentimes they don't show a lot of symptoms, and they can be a little bit poor doing calf, but not show a lot of symptoms. And they will shed their virus their entire life, and they'll infect other animals really for the remainder of their life. So that's what kind of can make it challenging with a cow that is infected with BVD, is that, yeah, it can be an abortion, but she can also have a calf that continues to spread that virus, and you won't know because the calf won't die. Oftentimes won't die. I kind of said it here, and PI animals they're easily detected through blood and tissue samples. Oftentimes, as I mentioned, that they can look fairly normal, but they're usually little poor doing cattle, but they're not. It's not obvious that you've got a PI animal, and they can get other cattle sick, and those cattle actually die from the issue. So the idea, if you do have an ongoing BVD problem, is just to remove those animals from the herd. Kind of a chronic BVD can result in lower calving rates. It'll increase the number of dry cows you have in your herd. So cows that are diagnosed as being pregnant and then never do have a calf, and maybe you see that she aborted, maybe you don't, but she just never has a calf. It can also lead, as I mentioned, other calves get sick. So increased calf mortality after they're born. And then again, the PI animals stay in the herd, and the disease process just cycles, just kind of goes around and around, and it can be difficult to get rid of if you don't address it. Really the best management practice with BVD, there are really good vaccines available. And so if BVD is present, you can test the calves, and they can be done through a tissue or blood sample, and get those calves out of your herd. You'll likely need to test over a 2-year period because that exposure can be ongoing, and so you'll need to continue to remove those animals out of the system. But most importantly is to have an ongoing vaccination program. And I have kind of underlined there that you follow the advice of your local vet, because there are different ways to go about this. It's not necessarily it's one size fits all, but my thoughts on it would be that you want to vaccinate all your calves with a modified live vaccine, kind of 3 to 6 months of age, and then revaccinate your replacement heifers the heifers that you keep in a herd with a modified live vaccine also prior to breeding. And then if you'll do that and then annually vaccinate your cows with a killed vaccine, you can pretty much get BVD out of your herd and keep it out. And so just again, it's a good ongoing vaccination program, makes a big difference with BVD. If you're gonna bring animals into your herd, if you buy them through a sale barn or whatever it might be, it can be a little bit iffy. But if you could know anything about the herd you're buying females from and that they have a ongoing vaccination program, that's certainly best. And if you can, and you've had a problem with BVD, it's good to test before purchasing and or transporting the animals. Any questions about BVD?
Anybody?
Anybody? Okay. We'll keep moving. I'll go to, these are just things I talked about. I won't go too deep into this, into that slide. Okay, there's really two others that can also be vaccinated for, and that's what's known as lepto and vibrio. It's a venereal disease. It's transferred from bull to cow and cow to bull. A cow can usually develop an immunity after she has it, and she can get rebred. If she gets bred and loses a calf or and aborts fairly early, she can get over the lepto or vibrio and rebreed, unless she's bred again by an infected bull. But she can, that immunity doesn't last very long, so she can be reinfected again down the road. Certainly, she can the next year. Your primary indication of either one of these diseases, and they're very similar, is that you're just going to have a lot of open cows and a lot of dry cows, and so cows that may be, again, diagnosed pregnant, and then they never have a calf, or you go to preg check in the fall, and you have a lot of open cows, and oftentimes lepto or vibrio can be the cause of that. Again, it's fairly easy to address through vaccination. There's multiple vaccines for both of these diseases, and we'll talk a little bit more about these other two bottom items, but vaccination program is certainly indicated to control having a defined breeding season. So in essence, not leaving bulls in year round, so you can break the disease cycle. Because if you've got infected cows and bulls and they keep infecting one another, there's really no break in a disease cycle. And so having a defined breeding season where you put the bulls in for a defined period of time and then pull them out can help break this disease cycle in addition to vaccination. And the other thing is to cull older bulls. And this is also true with another disease we're going to talk about, which is trick, which is actually probably a little more common. And again, older bulls are more susceptible to keeping and passing this disease on. So not keeping bulls around for a long time or not buying real old bulls from your neighbors can help keep this disease out of your herd, or both these diseases. Questions about those two? Okay, we're gonna get on to one, trichomoniasis, or just known as trick. And trick is a one that I've seen in cow herds that I have been involved in management of. It's the results can be quite similar to the other diseases that we talked about. It's a protozoa rather than a bacteria or a virus, but again, it's a venereal transmission. So again, bulls transmit it to and infect cows, and then if an infected cow can infect a bull, it just keeps kind of going around and around. Like vibrio and lepto, cows can develop a short-term immunity and eventually get bred back if they do lose their calf, but that immunity doesn't last long, and so they can be infected again the next year. But what you see in cows is just, they're just losing the calf fairly early on, most of the time, early embryonic death. You may never see any results or any evidence of an abortion, but you're going to see open cows when you go to have them bred, or if they abort later, you're going to see dry cows. cows that just never did show that they ever had a calf. Also going to see your calving season stretch out longer and longer and longer. So if you do have a defined season, let's say you have a 90-day breeding season, you'll see more and more of your cows pushing back later and later in that breeding season, or not getting bred at all. As far as management of that, it's important to remember that the bull is the biggest vector. He's the biggest culprit, and the trick lives in the folds and the sheath of the penis. And so virgin bulls will always be clean if they've never been a bred cows. So having younger bulls can help. A lot of your older bulls can be chronically infected, and there's just nothing you can do about it except move them out. And so using younger bulls is good. There's no vaccine for bulls. And you can see 80 to 90% of the cows that are bred by an infected bull will become infected. So you can see it's highly contagious. If you got an infected bull, he's going to infect your cows. So another management would be to cull open cows. If you know you've got a trick problem and you hold on to open cows, those cows can be harboring the disease, and then just keep passing it back to bulls and can keep going around and around. You can vaccinate cows, but it's really best, as I talked earlier, to break that disease cycle. And again, removing bulls and having a defined breeding season can help break that cycle. And again, I have here avoid year-round breeding, and then testing bulls for trick. I know the state of Utah requires that. I don't know what in other states if you have mandatory testing for your bulls to be turned out, but in Utah they do have a mandatory testing for any bulls that are turned out, and so you can have those bulls tested before they ever get turned out, and it's just a good practice to test every bull every year, and then positive bulls are required in Utah to be slaughtered within 14 days. And then negative bulls, they require a retest because sometimes you can get a false negative. And so if they're clean twice, you know that the bulls are clean, and you can feel comfortable turning them out. And what that's done in Utah is it's taken trick down to a very, very low level. Where they started doing this several years ago, there were quite a few bulls that tested positive, and in the last couple of years, it's gone down significantly. But these can be really, really damaging to the bottom line of your cattle operation, any of these diseases. Questions on trick? Or any questions on any of the diseases?
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
Are the vaccines, are they is it like one that can treat 3 of them? Like say lepto, Vibrio, and VVD, or are they just given separately?
Yeah, no, you can. There are combinations of lepto, Vibrio, and BVD vaccines. To my knowledge, there's not a combination with trick vaccine, but there is for lepto, Vibrio, and BVD, and those are, I'll talk a little bit kind of when I get into a summary about, when would be good times to vaccinate. But yes, you can hit them with one shot.
Oh, okay,
Good
great.
question.
Good to know. Thank you.
Makes it pretty simple. Good question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else have one?
Hello, this is Marge. Hi,
Yes.
everyone. How are you? I just made a comment on the chat that New Mexico does require, it's mandatory we do the trick test before our bulls leave elsewhere. So I just wanted to state that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, that's great, and it makes a big difference because these diseases, and trick is probably the nastiest one. It's the one I've had. It's a little tougher to manage because if you stay on top of your vaccination program with your cows, you can pretty well manage the other ones. But trick can be a little more difficult, and I've seen it cause problems in states that don't require it, and then you can have your own program, and the neighbor's bull jumps in with your cows, and I've seen that be a problem. So it's a pretty nasty disease. But thank you. I appreciate that, Marge. Okay.
I have
We're gonna-
another question.
Yes.
Okay, um, okay, we had issue with our neighbors. Well, right now it's okay, everything's resolved. But before that, there was bulls just left and right, and they were all and they're beginning to be mean. Would they just create that disease within themselves if that person wasn't catching his bulls? I know there were so many bulls and they just got so wild and mean, and I think they finally caught them all. So
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, would they have created their own disease within that area, or it has to come in from other place?
Yeah, they would have to be exposed to it, but even though, and you just mentioned that they didn't test their bulls, and so I think that happens in a lot of places where people kind of skirt the rules and don't test. And so if they were exposed at some point in time, they can harbor that disease forever, particularly trick. And so and the older they are, the more likely they are to have and harbor a disease just because they've had their whole life, multiple years to be exposed. So the chances of them being exposed increase as they get older. And so that's why it's just a good idea to move these bulls out. You know, I'm going to say 6-year-old bull is probably plenty old. And you're right, they get ornery and difficult to deal with. And I realize they're expensive. But boy, I can tell you from experience that having a lot of open cows is way more expensive than having to buy a bull. And so anyway, so yeah, they can't create it without being exposed, but I would be willing to bet that if your neighbor had a lot of really old bulls that hadn't been tested, I think it's probably a pretty good chance that they were harboring some of these diseases.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Anybody else? Okay, we're gonna switch gears, talk a little bit about poison plants, and this is the most likely plant I'm guessing that y'all deal with in your area. The other two I think are not real likely. I think it's more likely this, and I have not, as I told y'all earlier, I have not run cattle down in your part of the world, so you'll have to tell me if you have a lot of local weed in your area, but I'm guessing that you do. It's pretty prevalent in the Four Corners area and in drier climates, and it can be pretty nasty. It's causes abortion, birth defects. It can make the cows go anestrus, where they don't come into heat. It can make bulls infertile. It can also affect nursing calves, that they can be affected with some of the neurological symptoms that you see with local weed. And eventually, that doesn't always cause death, but it certainly can. The interesting part about local weed that is maybe a little different than some of the other poisonous plants is that it's poisonous in all stages of growth. And so some of the other plants are mainly just poisonous when they're in the lush stage of growth, but that's not the case for local weed. Now, I think it more of a problem if feed is really tight. So if you've had gone through some, drier times when your forage's availability is really low, and all that's out there is local weed and the cattle will load up on it, that's when you're more likely to have a problem. And so I know that it isn't always easy to manage how much grass you have out on range ground, but having available forage will help keep local weed from being as much of a problem. We're going to jump and just talk about a couple of the others. I'm not sure. Lupine tends to be a little higher elevation. So if there's some higher elevation range ground that y'all graze in, could be a problem. I know farther north in Utah and in a lot of the places where I've run cattle in the past, lupine can be a big issue. Again, cause birth defects. It can cause calves to be really weak and a loss of calves at birth. Doesn't usually cause abortions, but it can. and certainly is more common just to kill cattle that eat a lot of it. It's most toxic when it's in the early growth stage, but when it gets later on in growth, it can get dry seed pods, and those dry seed pods can be toxic as well. And again, it's usually a higher elevation plant. I'm guessing lupine's not a big issue in your area. Is that accurate, or anybody?
I think here in the Four Corners we have the Carrizo Mountains and
Okay.
the Cheska. Yeah, I think I've seen, just
Okay.
driving through and again at the higher elevations. Yes,
Yep. Okay.
they're
So that
present.
can be a problem. And I think you probably see local weed probably on your lower elevation.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
I'm sure you see a lot of that. So, okay. And then the other would be, I don't know if you have any in your higher elevation, again, a lot of ponderosa pines, and you know, it takes cattle to eat quite a bit of pine needles, but that definitely can cause abortion if cattle eat pine needles, and they won't really select it. It's usually if you get cattle caught in a lot of snow or conditions when there's really just no grass, they will eat pine needles and can cause problems. So that's usually kind of a severe winter weather or drought, can cause abortion, weak calves at birth, and retain placentas as well. As far as the poison plants in your area, the research I did, that was pretty much what I came up with, was those three, and I would guess most prevalent would be the local weed, and then maybe followed by lupine. You almost have to make cattle eat pine needles, but they definitely will if they get into a situation. Questions on poison plants?
I have a question. The pictures I seen right there, doesn't look familiar, but every, you know, I don't see it often. Maybe like I would just see 1 or 2% in my rangeland. It's called milkweeds. It has a fluffy top, and then if you break it, and then in the stem, there's usually milk coming out, comes out. Um, I haven't really experienced it, but I know in the past, our late parents used to tell us that what that's what bloats livestock, and it would eventually die from it. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. It's called milkweeds. It's like a cotton on the top, and once you touch it, and it just flies, just
Okay.
blooms.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with what they call milk vetch, maybe somewhat different. It's actually kind of related to local weed, in terms of it's a similar species. But yeah, I'm not as familiar with that. But I talked to some of our folks at the Poison Plants Lab at Utah State, and they feel like the local weed was probably the biggest issue in terms of abortion down in your part of the world. But it sounds like that milkweed can be an issue as well. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that one up.
Quick question.
Yes.
Regarding the ponderosa pine needles, are pinon needles similar to other hooved animals like sheep? Are they poisonous?
I'm not sure about sheep. I would suspect it would be similar if they because their digestive system is very similar, although not everything that affects cows or sheep will affect each other in the same way. But I would guess that if sheep ate a lot of pine needles, you could have some of the similar problems. That'd be my guess.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bet. Anybody else? Okay. All right. So what do you do about it? I mean, it can be pretty tough. You're not going to go out and spray or anything like that. And so and again, as I mentioned earlier, it's just a matter of making sure you got adequate forage, which is not always under your control. I definitely understand that. But the bottom line is, if a cow doesn't have good alternatives, she's going to eat what she can eat, and she'll definitely eat poison plants and more likely have more likely have a problem. So if there's an opportunity for you to be able to push cattle out of areas or up into areas where they've got better feed, I'm not sure exactly how your range grazing works, but I'm assuming it would be somewhat similar to BLM or Forest Service permits where you probably fairly extensive, I'm guessing pretty large areas where they graze. If you've got opportunity to move the cows and put them on better feed, that could certainly help. They definitely can be difficult to deal with. Okay, so we're gonna back up and just talk a little bit about some basic nutrition stuff. First of all, really the basic nutritional needs, this kind of goes without saying, but you've got water, energy, protein, minerals, and vitamins. And cattle and people and any living thing needs all of those things. So we'll hit on them just briefly. But it's important also to remember that there's a priority to nutrient use. And so, the very first priority, an animal, if they're eating energy and protein, is they're gonna eat enough to really just stay alive and to maintain body function, keep their heart beating, keep their vital organs functioning. So if animals near starvation, all of their energy will go into just maintaining that body and to stay alive. And then if they're getting enough to do that, then what they eat would lead to some level of activity. They can walk around, graze, drink, all of that. And then thirdly, if they're pregnant, that next order or priority would go to pregnancy. So if a cow is pregnant, she's going to have to get pretty darn thin to abort a calf. Now that doesn't mean it can't happen, because it definitely can. But once she is pregnant, she'll do all she can outside of, dying herself. She'll do all she can to maintain that pregnancy. That's the way they're wired. And then next would be lactation. So if she doesn't have if she's got enough to satisfy these other things, and she has a calf, that she'll give all she can to milk. It may not be a lot of milk, but she will give some energy use to milk. If her energy and protein levels are so low, at some point she just won't lactate. But that will go to lactation, and then we have growth, and then energy reserves. And so bottom line is she'll eventually put on fat if she's covering all these other needs and she's got enough energy and protein and her other nutrients. She'll put on some fat in terms of energy reserves. And then seventh, way down the list, is estrus cycle. So more likely, a cow, if she is nutrient deficient, she'll do all these other things first before she'll actually cycle and get pregnant. And then, of course, lastly would be putting on external fat or back fat on their body. So you can see that as far as that cow is concerned, estrus cycle or her heat cycle is way down the list of priorities. Excuse me. And so we've got to make sure, if we're wanting to get that cow bred, we've got to make sure that she has got everything covered, because she's gonna give all she has to all these other activities first before she actually comes into heat. So just talking a little bit about a critical nutrient, and maybe this is kind of obvious, but boy, I've seen a lot of situations where water or water quality has caused problems, and so sometimes we take it for granted. But I'm guessing in your part of the world that water isn't just running everywhere, and so making sure cattle have water and having quality water is something that probably a lot of you are very focused on. But it can be easily taken for granted. It's good to remember that water makes up 70% of an animal's weight, and so to maintain their body weight and normal function, they got to drink a lot of water. And really, the requirement is that they have unrestricted access to water. If we want those animals to perform at their peak ability, they need to have water, as much water as they want and when they want it. And it's also important to remember that if they don't eat, they don't drink. Or excuse me, if they don't drink, they don't eat. So your feed intake drops if their water intake drops. And the bottom line is no water, no feed. A cow, even at a cooler temperature, 70 degrees, will require in the neighborhood of 12 gallons of water a day. But that can double in the heat. You know, get 90 degrees or higher, that water need can double. Important, clean water. Water that's clean will improve water intake, and if they drink all the water they want, they're going to eat more. And so those things kind of feed on one another. Sometimes, and I've seen situations where water quality is really poor, and we get down here to like salinity, and the instances that I'm familiar with and had some experience with was that the water was fairly high in what they call total dissolved solids, was fairly saline. It wasn't salty necessarily, but when it got hot, those cattle just really were poor. They do okay in the winter in this area when their water intake was lower, but when they calved and it started to get warm, they could not drink enough water to stay healthy. And so those cattle had to be moved off those pastures in order to get good production out of them. But you can have problems with salinity, pH, sulfates, nitrates. All of those things can decrease water intake and hurt performance. Questions on water? All right, talk a little bit about energy. And really, in a range situation, when we're talking about energy, we're talking about the plant cell walls and the structural components of the plants that they eat, which is grass and the other forbs and shrubs that cattle will eat. Important to remember that as a plant matures, the fiber content of that plant increases. And that in that case, the more mature it is, the lower the protein, and eventually you decrease digestibility of that plant. So a mature plant tends to be lower in digestibility. But you know, ruminants are uniquely adapted to utilize these products and even low quality forages. And that's why you run cattle in the part of the world that you do, is that it's really not suited for anything else. You're not going to grow corn out there, I'm fairly certain. So there's lots of parts of the country that cattle can utilize and through their digestive system to make a very useful product out of, you know, fresh air, sunshine, and a little bit of water. They can produce a product that we can use and has a lot of value. So ruminants have that unique ability to do that. The other parts of plants that a lot of energy can come from would be the non-structural part of a plant or plant cell contents, and that really amounts to starches or sugars that can be in plants. Obviously, a good example of a starch in a plant would be any kind of grain that you might get. But for generally speaking, in a ranch situation where you're running cattle in a range environment, they're getting virtually all of their energy from the plant cell wall. Now, it's important to remember also that the energy requirements vary depending on how big the cows are, what their body condition is, what stage of production there is that they're in, whether they're pregnant or lactating, and then also the weather. You know, if it's cold, extreme cold, their energy requirements go up. Okay, a little bit about protein. Protein is, in a practical sense, tends to be really the first limiting nutrient in a low quality forage diet. So oftentimes cattle may have enough forage, but the quality of that forage is fairly low. It could be a lot of dry forage that they might be grazing, but they can do really well if we can supplement with a little bit of protein. So oftentimes, most of the time we're needing to supplement something to your cows, it's going to be protein in most cases. So oftentimes we're supplementing protein seasonally, whether it's for forage quality because the forage quality is low. Every time I give a presentation, I find typos. So they're supposed to be stage of production, not state of production. But anyway, depending on our stage of production, their protein requirements are higher. Again, late in their gestation or in their lactation, they're going to have higher protein requirements. And if the diet or if their forage is deficient and they don't have enough protein, they won't eat as much forage. But if we add protein into a deficient diet, they'll eat more forage. Therefore, by increasing their protein in their diet, it increases their forage, and therefore their energy intake also increases. And then protein is really important in the animal's rumen to digest energy. So lack of protein just generally hurts our overall productivity. The great thing about the rumen, again, is that there's microbes or bacteria that are in the rumen, and they can utilize nitrogen to make amino acids, which is known as microbial protein. And so the ruminants can utilize what's called non-protein nitrogen or urea or just nitrogen in a protein supplement. So you'll often see a protein supplement like this one here, with like a lick tub, which I'm sure y'all have used before. And oftentimes they'll contain what they call NPN or non-protein nitrogen. And cattle can utilize that quite well if it's not the only source of protein. So you want to have some urea and some natural protein in your protein source, or all natural is fine as well. But oftentimes adding a little bit urea can cheapen that back, and the cattle can utilize it fairly well. Okay, I should ask for questions earlier, but any questions on the three things we just discussed: water, energy, or protein? Okay, we're just gonna talk about vitamins and minerals real quickly. We could talk, for a couple hours on this subject, but generally speaking, there are vitamins and minerals that really are not always occurring in the environment your cattle are in. Vitamins A, D, and E are ones that are normally supplemented, particularly in the winter or when the forages aren't as lush. Cattle pretty well always need salt. And it's important to know that salt is really the only mineral that cattle will seek out. So they really won't seek minerals. They may be phosphorus deficient or calcium deficient, but generally speaking, their systems don't really know that. But they do know when they need salt, and they will seek out salt. Phosphorus and potassium are often deficient in mature grasses. So like during the winter or when you're in your dry season, some phosphorus and potassium supplementation can be good. Oftentimes sulfur is more of a problem if it's too high, because it can interfere with some of your trace minerals. So if you've got high sources of or high levels of sulfur in water or sometimes in feed, that can be an issue. And then getting on down to your trace minerals: copper, zinc, iodine, selenium are all important for health, reproduction, of overall performance. So in general, you need to supplement with some kind of mineral year round. And I would say, generally speaking, a block like this, like a trace mineralized salt block, works pretty well when forage quality is good. And then when you've got low quality forage, I think these loose minerals, like something that comes in a bag and you can feed them in something that looks like this, or you'll probably seen these kind of mineral feeders. You can get a little more phosphorus and things in this kind of a mineral that can supplement during times of the year when your requirements are higher and your forage quality is low. Questions on that? All right, so really the bottom line is, when we're looking at nutrition, is that it's important to try to match up your cows' energy and protein requirements with what's available in your environment, and then you have to supplement. So if we're looking here, this line up here is going to be the animals. Let's see, yeah, the animals' requirements during through the different production cycle. What I assumed is that it's like a cow that calves in April. And then, excuse me, this will be her energy intake here, and then her required protein intake here. And then these bars represent what's available in a typical range situation. This isn't perfect for every environment, but what I was just trying to point out is at certain times of the year, the requirement of that animal is going to be lower than what you have, and other times of the year it's going to be high. It's going to be higher. That your animal's requirements are higher than what is in your forage base. And the same thing with protein. Animals' requirements at certain times of the year are going to be higher than what's in your forage base, like through the winter, for example. Now, again, you'd need to create something like this for your specific environment. I'm just trying to make a point that there are times when you do need to add energy and or protein to your animal's diet. So really that comes down to body condition and trying to manage body condition. And so I don't know if y'all have done body condition scoring on your cow herds, but it's a good objective way to kind of understand what kind of condition your cows are in, how much energy she's got stored in fat, and be able to look at that over time in an objective way to understand where you're at. And so the scoring ranges from 1 to 9, and I'll show you a few examples of this, and we could spend a lot of time on this. I just want to introduce you to it. Some of you probably already you do this, but just give you an example of a condition score 1 cow. So this is a cow, condition score 1. She's very thin. She's weak. She does not going to move around very fast. You can see basically all of her bones, shoulders, up in her shoulder blade, and the spinous process here in the back, all of her ribs. She's real thin. Oftentimes, again, they look real weak. And you can also notice that her muscle is pretty much just gone. And what an animal does when they get this malnourished is they actually break down muscle to utilize for energy to stay alive. And so you see a lot of muscle loss. Going on to condition score 2, this animal is thin. I'd say the biggest difference you see is she's going to have a little higher energy level, but you'll also notice a little more muscle back here in her hindquarters and up in the front. She hasn't depleted all of her muscle yet, so she'll have a little higher energy level in the cow in that condition. And then a condition score 3, she's also thin. You can see a few ribs there, spinous process, the tail, head, and bones here in the back are pretty pronounced. But again, I'd say the biggest difference when looking at these two is, again, it's a muscle. You can see more full muscle here in the forequarter and in the rear when you compare these two cows, but she's still fairly thin. Condition score 4, and really I'd say most of the time your cows are going to be in kind of 4 and 5 range most of the time in a range environment. They can appear thin, but you're seeing a little bit of rib, but they're not real sticking out. You can see a little bit of the spinous process here, maybe a little on the backbone, but not a lot. But you can see there's really not much muscle loss here or in the front quarter. And you might want this cow to carry a little more flesh, but she doesn't look too bad. And then condition score 5, and to me, these 5 and 6 are kind of an ideal position or ideal condition that you want your cows to be in when they calve. So she's going to look, and again, they call this moderately thin. I think this cow looks pretty darn good. You're not going to see much rib there, a little bit of fat cover. And again, she looks more full in the shoulder and on the rear quarter. And in this condition score 6, it's just even more of a rounded, smooth appearance. And oftentimes in a range environment, you probably don't see a cow much fatter than that unless she's a dry cow, I wouldn't guess. Condition score 7, you just get fatter as we go. We won't spend a lot of time on those. I have seen some cows this fat, but they're almost always dry. And yeah, kind of funny, their neck kind of disappears when they get this fat. They no longer have a neck. Same thing happens to me. My neck disappears too. So again, we talked a little bit about priority of nutrient use. I just bring this up again because again, the estrus cycle is really what we're talking about here, is getting cows bred. So there's been a lot of research done looking and relating body condition to getting cows bred. So a cow's got to conceive between 80 and 85 days post calving. She has to get bred again to keep that postpartum interval right at 12 months. If you want that cow to calve every 12 months, she's got to get bred again 80 to 85 days after. And there's a real strong relationship between the body condition at calving and how well she does reproducing. And this is some Oklahoma State data. So cows with their condition score 4 or lower only bred back at 60%. Calves that were a 5 were at 80%. And then if they were condition score 6 or better when they calved, you're looking at 90+% breed back, which is really, you're going to want to be in here and get those cows bred every year. So that makes a big difference on your bottom line. So again, big relationship between body condition score. And I think the take home there is, and there's a lot more of this kind of information online that you can really study on body condition. but it's a good management practice to measure body condition, especially through the winter months and up to calving, to make sure your cows are not losing condition. Because if you're looking at them but you're not writing anything down, you're not really measuring anything, you can kind of fool yourself. Either you think they're always too thin all the time, or you always think they're fat. It just depends on whether you're a glass half full or glass half empty person. But being able to look at them objectively is a great management tool. I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that one. It's kind of more of the same. So again, got to get cows bred back 80 to 85 days. Why is that important? What if your cow slips back and she doesn't bred quite that quick? Well, it's pretty costly when she doesn't, because the calf gains about 1.8 pounds for every day a lot that it's alive in a normal condition. So if you equate that into those cows that calve earlier always have a heavier calf, and that's why those calves are just older. So when you go to sell those calves, if you calve on April 1st and you're going to sell your calves in the middle of October, the calves that are born earlier are going to be 1.8 pounds heavier for every day every day of age. Well, if you figure at calf price today, and this is actually low, calves are a little higher than this, but at $2.50 a pound calf, that's $4.50 a day that it's costing you not to get your cows bred. And that number ought to catch your attention. And so getting this cow bred every 12 months is really critical to your bottom line. And again, $4.50 a day right now is what it costs you not to do that. And that's assuming a 90-day calving season. So the calf born on day 1 is going to weigh 162 pounds more than the calf born on day 90. Questions on that? Anybody want to argue with me? I like a good debate.
I had a quick recap from the mineral supplements.
Yeah.
Talking about sulfur, copper. Similar, is that similar for sheep nutrition?
Yeah. So sheep, you'll have some more sensitivities, especially with your trace minerals. And selenium can be a real problem. Go back here. I've got a lot of slides back. I'm not going to try to do it. Selenium can be a real problem with sheep.
Okay.
And you know what they call white muscle disease. You're probably familiar with that if you're have a sheep, where it's not as big a problem with cows. But selenium at really high levels can also be toxic. And
Okay.
so, you know, sheep are a little different, I would say, in terms of their mineral supplementation. I'm more of a beef cattle nutritionist than I am sheep. I would just say I know they can be a little different. So it would be good to look that stuff up and make sure that if you are going to like use the same mineral for your sheep and your cows, that you're not causing a problem. And in most cases, I don't think you would with most over-the-counter products. But also, in some cases, depending on what your forages need, that copper and selenium in particular and zinc can really be even more problematic with sheep than they are with cows.
Okay, I just want to get your input. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a great answer for you on that, but generally they can be similar, but particularly with selenium, you can see some differences. Anybody else?
Okay.
I promise we're about done here. But anyway, I hope this gets your attention, because this is big dollars in your operation, just getting these cows bred every year. And that's really, you know, in all the operations that I've worked in, if you want to really focus on what makes money, that's getting your cows bred early in the breeding season, and then keeping that calf alive and weaning a high percentage of the calves that you have born is really what those are the production things that you can measure to make a big difference. All right. So a couple things I kind of brought up today and the questions you need to ask yourself is, is your calving season in sync with your forage base? Is there an opportunity or to maybe switch your calving to match up your cow's highest nutritional needs with your best forage? That isn't always possible, but it's just something to think about. Does your supplementation program fill the holes when your cow is deficient? And is your cow's size and milk production magnifying your weaknesses and your resources. And what I mean by that is there's a big push in some areas to have really big cows, really high producing big cows. And that's great if you have plenty of forage, and the forage is not a limiting issue, but I would say, excuse me, get a drink of water here. In virtually all of the Western United States, forage is not is a limiting issue, a limiting resource. And so matching up your cow size and how much she milks is really critical. We could talk again just about that, but making sure your cow fits your environment is really important. The supplementation, hay and protein, can be a real costly way to cover up the problem. So you may have cows that don't really fit your environment and you just feed them more and you get by, but is that a cost-effective thing to do? And I would suggest that you're probably better off having a more of a moderate, or even maybe even a small frame cow that gives just enough, gives enough milk to keep your calf healthy and let you wean a good healthy calf, but she gets bred every year and you don't have to supplement her a lot. Maybe a better cow for your environment. So just in general, we talked about reproductive management on heifers. So these are just some general ideas here. So your heifer calves, and this is just, I'm just thinking from a reproductive standpoint, this is not the only thing you should vaccinate with or for, but from a reproductive standpoint, is that branding or in that 3-4 month age time, is give them modified live BVD vaccine. When they're weaned, give them the brucellosis vaccine, modified live BVD and lepto, and then right before they're bred, BVD killed, lepto and Vibrio. Again, and then when they become a cow, you just want to have an annual vaccination of a BVD, lepto and Vibrio, and then call your open cows. If cows aren't getting bred, you don't know that it's a disease problem, but you also don't know that it isn't. And keeping those cows out of your herd will break that cycle. On the bull side, you can also give them a BVD vaccine, lepto, Vibrio, trick test, and cull your older bulls. When they get old, they just need to be gone. They're just too much of a risk of continuing to harbor some of these diseases. And it sounds like in a lot of the country that y'all run in, trick testing is required. Don't try to skirt that, and make sure that everybody that you run your cows with, if you're running common, that everybody is kind of toeing the line there, because it's good for all of you in the long run. Okay, and I'm just kind of wrapping up. Say, the bottom line when you think about management is you just can't measure what you can't manage. Excuse me. You can't manage what you don't measure. So going back to the bulls, we talked about culling bulls. It's a good idea to do an annual breeding soundings exam on your bulls. Are they structurally fit? Do they have adequate sperm quantity and quality? And obviously we talked about trick testing. And your veterinarian can help you with all this. It does cost a little bit of money, but it's a great investment when you talk about the value of a calf today being worth, I don't know, $1,200-$1,300, depending on what they weigh. Have a defined breeding season, 60 to 120 days. So remove those bulls at the end of your breeding season. It breaks a potential disease cycle. It also helps you understand what's going on in your herd. If you got cows that aren't getting bred in that time, it's easier trying to figure out why that is, and that they're either not getting bred or you've got a disease issue. Leaving bulls year round, you never know what kind of problems that you're having. Again, with the cows, we talked about defined breeding season, remove the bulls at the end of the breeding season. Pregnancy testing is really critical. You have to know your preg rates and track them over time, and know what kind of progress you're making on getting cows bred. So your preg rate is really, you calculate that by the number of pregnant cows divided by the number of cows that are exposed to the bull. And again, call your open cows. And then your calving rate, how many calves are born alive? Depending on the environment that you calve in, this may be a hard thing to do. And I recognize that. I've worked on ranches where you really never knew how many calves you had until we brought them in for branding, because the cows mainly calved on their own. And so sometimes that can be hard to do, but if you have a time that you bring them in for branding or whatever it might be, count those calves and understand how many calves are born alive or that you have, and that'll give you an idea what your dry rate is, or the number of dry cows divided by the number of pregnant cows. So, you know, or you have cows that are diagnosed pregnant, but then are not having a calf. What's that rate, and how does that change? Oh, excuse me. How does that change over time? And then your weaning rate, how many calves are you weaning relative to the number of cows that were diagnosed as being pregnant? Again, a good number to track over time. And then if you have problems, you can isolate where those problems are happening. Am I losing calves, you know, while they're out on the range after branding, or are they being lost before? Or where, you know, what's going on? Are cows not getting bred at all? Or are they losing their calf, or what is it? And if we're not measuring these things, then we don't really know what's going on. So kind of talked about this. What can we learn from these numbers? I think this is my last slide. So, yeah, you know, preg rate, we know what cows that don't get bred. So if we can get rid of those cows, we're saving on feed cost. We can break the potential disease cycle. And also, if you've got big cows that aren't getting bred because they're not getting enough groceries in your environment, then you can get rid of them. They're not working in your herd. When we're calculating calving rate or the number of dry cows, well, what's going on there? Are we having abortions? Are we having calving difficulty where the calves are being lost at birth? You know, maybe we have bulls that are throwing calves that are too big. Are we having birth defects or weak calves? Is it a weather issue? You know, if we understand what's going on here, we can figure out how to try to attack it. And then your weaning rate, cows that wean a calf, we know, and we can address, you know, is there a calf health issue? So are we losing calves after branding and they're weaning? That can be a whole different issue that we maybe need to address with a different vaccination program or some other approach to try to address that if that's where we're losing calves. So the bottom line is to try to narrow down the problems and develop solutions. Summary, we talked about this: vaccination program, managing poison plants, having proper body condition, and then measure and manage reproduction. All right, hope I didn't talk too fast.
So before questions, I just want to let the audience know that I'm going to share a poll and quizzes, or a poll. If you could answer, I would appreciate it. Go ahead with the questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I had a quick question regarding the diseases. Are there eradication programs in the U.S. trying to get rid of, you know, with like human diseases? We've eradicated some. Is there same with the animal population, such as cows?
Yeah, so that has happened with the brucellosis, and to a great degree, we've really minimized brucellosis impact. And for the most part, the brucellosis problems that we have in the U.S. are in areas where we've got big wildlife populations that really we can't control, that mix with their cow populations. And then the same thing I mentioned with trick, and that's just if everybody will continually trick test and remove trick infected animals, there's progress being made there, but it just requires in some states it's mandatory, in some states it isn't. And so it just requires people being willing to adapt just good management practices. And if you do that and your neighbors do, you can keep it from being a problem. But if you do it and your neighbors don't, then it'll kind of keep sticking and keep being a problem. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have a question?
Dr. Segrist.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I I noticed that you didn't put any 8-way or 7-way shots in their recommendations, and when I was younger, and going to all these presentations, I heard about the Vibrio and the Lepto, all that, and I added that in there. And then you realize you got 4 or 5 shots you're giving a cow, and that's kind of borderline on your BQA stuff because you want the less shots as much as possible. So is there a thing that that kind of combines all of them, or is it just strictly because I work with my vet, and for the longest time he was doing more a kill virus, and then recently after he passed away a couple of years ago, but his new vet here, she kept his same program, his same protocols, but now she's kind of moving over to modified live. Is there any suggestions you can give me in moving my vaccinations from a kill vaccine to a modified live?
Yeah, so I'm going to address your first question first with regarding the 8-way or the Clostridial vaccines. So I debated how to do when I put this together. I was just trying to address reproductive related disease vaccines. So to back up, I would definitely give 8-way and a 7-way vaccine to your calves, and if your vet recommends, also to your cows. It kind of, some vets will recommend that, the once cattle have had it a couple of times as a calf, that they don't need to continue to get it as a cow. I'd talk to your vet about that. I would say, generally speaking, that would be the camp that I'm in. But your vet may have slightly different recommendations for that. But yes, definitely want to have a Clostridial vaccine with your calf hood vaccinations. Now your next one, as far as, okay, we give a lot of shots to these cattle. And so, as I think with Terrell's question, you can give the Vibrio, Lepto, and BVD vaccine all in one. And then you talked about killed versus modified live. So years ago, there was a lot of concern about modified live vaccines causing abortion in pregnant cows. And I'm guessing that your older vet, that was his concern. And it was a legitimate concern at that time. Things have changed quite a bit in the vaccines and how they do it. So I would say definitely in your calves, your calf hood vaccine, your weaning vaccine, that you can use a modified live vaccine and you'll get a stronger immune response. And then what I have recommended here is that after that, your boosters can be a kill vaccine. But if your vet is comfortable with a modified live vaccine after that, I think that's fine, because there are some modified live vaccines that are cleared for pregnant cows. I just didn't want to put that in the presentation because, somebody might, okay, well, he, say, well, he said that, and then you end up buying a vaccine that's not cleared for pregnant cows and having a problem. So just to be 100% safe, I just went ahead and said, well, the kill vaccine for your older cows, if it's an annual booster, is adequate. And I think it is. But if your vet is okay with the modified live vaccine, then also I would be okay with it as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's a good question, Dustin. I appreciate you asking it.
I just want to say one more time, the poll is up for our audience to answer. If you would answer, I would greatly appreciate it.
Dr. Sechrist, one more other question. I've always heard that the cows, regarding trick, they can cycle through it, and you were saying that they kind of become like persistently infected after that, or? So
with trick, cows, they can cycle through it, but they can be reinfected the next year. So once they've had it, oftentimes, if they do get bred again by a clean bull, then oftentimes they'll be okay with that pregnancy, but it'll be way later than the rest of your cows. So she'll be real late in her pregnancy. But she can be reinfected the next year. So that doesn't make her immune for her lifetime. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. I know that they said about 2 or 3 cycles should be fine, and after that, but the bulls, like you said, are for life basically. So,
Yeah.
but I guess just follow the state's quarantine process after that if you do get tricked, right?
I would, yes, because boy, it's such, if you've dealt with it, and it sounds like maybe you have, boy, it's really, it's a big kick in the butt economically. It can be really, really devastating. And I have dealt with it on ranches that I've been involved with. It's pretty tough. So being really aggressive and careful with trick is, I just think, a really good policy. And if you have to run in common with neighbors, boy, getting everybody on the same page and it is really real important to do. I'm not sure if that's a problem in your part of the world, but it is in a lot of places. You know, it seems like there's always somebody who doesn't think it's a big deal, you know? And so it just takes one.
Yeah, it does. It just takes one, and I know I've just always followed recommendations. I mean, pulling the bulls, trick testing them before the season, then after the season is been really enlightful too. So, and it gets you to breathe a little easier after that. So once they come back negative and all that. So yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and you'll see people go to the sale barn and buy old bulls and put them on their cows. Boy, that's a heck of a risk to do that. That's a bad practice. It sounds like that's not something you would do, but you probably have neighbors that might, and that could be a little scary.
Like the old saying goes, well, at least one strong fence, right, to your neighbors.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You're right on.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate the presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate your questions, Dustin, and appreciate you jumping on.
Sure thing.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your time, Dr. Sechrist. It was very informative. I learned a lot. There is some chats and messages also thanking you for your presentation. So if you would like to take a look at those.
Yeah, my pleasure. I appreciate the invite, and I'd be happy to do it again. So if I can help in any way, I'd be happy to. And look forward to getting in your part of the world. So
really appreciate it. May I share my screen? I have a few more, a little bit more information to share before we end
I'll
this
stop
session.
it on my end. Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, so with the attendees still with us, we are having a food preservation and water bath canning, salsa, and other tomato products workshop. That's going to be held at Nanan Hizad Chapter House on September 19th. The time is 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You can register by scanning the barcode or going to the Navajo Sustainable Agricultural Product website. So again, that's September 19th at Nanan Hizad. And then next coming up is going to be our fall gardening tips. That's our next webinar. It's going to be next Wednesday, September 11th, again at 5:30 to 6:30. That's going to be presented by John Garlish, who's the extension agent in Bernalillo County. Again, you can either scan the flyer to get registered or go to the Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Program website. And again, we thank you again, Dr. Sechrist, for your presentation. And again, this is our conservation planning program, teaching and outreaching to ranchers and producers in agriculture. And this concludes our workshop. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
And I was going to introduce the NSA program who's hosting this webinar, Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project. We also work in tandem with USDA. We are a New Mexico State affiliate. We also work with Diné College Land Grant Office and the Community Outreach Patient Empowerment. A little bit about the Navajo Sustainable Agricultural Project. We're an initiative in collaboration with Diné College, as I mentioned again, and we do community outreach in terms of helping producers with their conservation plans. We also do community outreach in terms of teaching, hosting, and providing information such as this webinar. And let me back up. earlier I stated that we provide community outreach through workshops and such as these ones. So we're also funded by USDA, and we help Navajo farmers and socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. And we have our mission statement. So we want to improve ranchers, their operations, their profitability, and just overall become sustainable. Most of the producers that we help are Navajo, and we also use USDA programs and services for these producers, and just overall help the local community and provide sustainable food and just sustainable agriculture.